Okay, I believe we are live now, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with the introduction. So welcome everyone to countering the false promises of the day. This program is nonprofit organization that seeks to relationship building, dialogue, and social action. The Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan is an ordained minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, in the United States and Canada, a church consultant, justice advocate, journalist, and death penalty abolitionist. In recognition of his work to stop executions, Dr. Sullivan was given the 2022 Death Penalty Abolition Award by Restorative Justice International, the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Social Justice Award by Governor Mike DeWine and the Ohio Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission, the 2019 Humanitarian Award from the Black Heritage Library and Multicultural Center of Findlay, Ohio, and the 2019 Victim Services Award from Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. In 2018, Dr. Sullivan received the African American Liberation Award from the National Convocation of the Christian Church of Disciples of Christ. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Ohio University, a Master of Divinity degree from Lexington Theological Seminary, a Doctor of Ministry from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, and honorary doctorates from Bethany College, Bethany, West Virginia, and Heidelberg University in Tiffin, Ohio. And I'm going to put the rest of his bio in the chat for those who are interested in learning more about him. And with that, Dr. Sullivan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Geneva. Good afternoon to everyone assembled here. It's my pleasure to join you in a conversation about capital punishment and the false promises that it makes to the public. I begin by acknowledging that the public has every right to be outraged over violent, horrific acts that distort or destroy the lives of our fellow citizens, our neighbors, public servants, and more. To be very specific, that public includes family members of murder victims, often called co-victims, a label that I myself have been forced to wear after the 1997 murder of my younger sister in Cleveland. We co-victims are justified in harboring feelings of rage and anger over the killing of our loved ones. Our sentiments are reactions to the calculated, unethical, and immoral decision-making that drove other human beings to engage in grotesque, murderous acts that abruptly ended the lives of other human beings, or sometimes gradually ended their lives, of our family members, community members, and thus these folks have altered forever the direction of our families and our communities. My sister Jennifer was just discovering her identity, her power, and her promise. By the time she was 21, she had a 2-year-old daughter and had every reason to think that after living through a few bad decisions, she was heading into a future of high achievement. Then suddenly, and with no warning, she was snatched from her daughter, snatched from her family, snatched from her future, and snatched from this earth by the grotesque force of gunfire. Now, the fact that I have earned 2 degrees from graduate seminaries does not give me any license to profess that I know the mysteries of life and death. I do not. Even so, I do not believe Jennifer's death, her murder, was God's will. For the God that I know and serve is committed to human flourishing, not human perishing. As Ohioans like me acknowledge our frustration over acts of murder, The urgent questions before us are, how do we respond to violent, murderous crime? What is our response to rightfully and properly convicted people who have angered us and hurt us the most? While I am a co-victim, I'm also a man of Christian faith who represents thousands of hope-infused Christians who participate in the ministries of the Ohio Council of Churches, a statewide body that brings together 17 Ohio-based Christian denominations as a Jesus Christ movement for unity, justice, and peace. Through my intersecting identities, I advance the belief that whether a life-ending act is carried out on a Cleveland, Ohio street or in a Chillicothe, Ohio prison, as authorized by the state, killing is wrong. To be sure, homicide, to show that homicide is abhorrent, is itself abhorrent. When rivers swell and flood our communities, and I've experienced flooding when I lived in Findlay, Ohio, no life-honoring responders would dare add more water to an existing flood, for such would be counterproductive, illogical, and even deadly. Instead, responders would try to stop the flow of water, to stop the flooding. Despite proponents' claims that execution have murder preventative properties, the cycle of calculated, unethical, and immoral acts that lead to homicide in our neighborhoods is not stopped by the state's own brand of calculated, unethical, and immoral homicidal acts called executions. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, from 1990 to the present, murder rates are higher in death penalty states than in non-death penalty states. So it turns out that executions only exacerbate the cycle of death while eroding the state's moral credibility. My friend and noted death penalty abolitionist Shane Claiborne, a Christian, often observes that the reason that the death penalty continues to exist in the United States is that a good numbers of Christians support it. The observation is an interesting one, particularly as we Christians know that Jesus was once asked to authorize a public stoning execution of a woman caught in adultery. Interestingly, her male counterpart was not convicted and was not condemned, an early sign of bias in the ethically bankrupt execution business. While proponents claim the death penalty system is fair, even the most casual observers understand that bias exists in death sentencing today. It is evident in the fact that the vast majority of Ohio murder cases do not result in a death sentence. According to research by Abraham Bonowitz of Death Penalty Action, death sentences from rural counties are especially rare, and so too is execution of a defendant when the victim is Black. People of color are the victims of violent crime in Ohio roughly 66% of the time. Yet of Ohio's 56 executions so far, the victims in those cases were white about 66% of the time. The disparities of our legal system do not take away from the horror and awfulness of any crime, but when we talk about the ultimate punishment and use of political power to enact it, we also have the moral obligation and the ethical responsibility to talk about how we decide who gets this penalty and who does not. race, politics, religion, and the reality of county lines and county budgets certainly play major roles that must not be ignored. As capital trials cost great sums of money to manage, small rural cities and towns do not often have the revenues necessary to seek death for the accused. This is why most capital cases in Ohio occur in larger counties, particularly Cuyahoga County, whose anchoring big city is Cleveland, and Franklin, whose anchoring large city is Columbus. According to Ohioans to Stop Executions, capital punishment in Ohio, those trials are seen in these two counties, which comprise just 2.2% of all jurisdictions. OTC reports that these two counties were responsible for 56.2 of all death penalty cases initiated from 1981 to 2017. So back to the Jesus story. Jesus told the woman's all-male jury members that they could stone her only if they themselves were sinless. And of course, when he told them this, these jurors walked away. They dropped their stones and walked away, of course, because they were not sin-free. They were not perfect individuals. Sparked by love and justice, Jesus interrupted the sexism in the justice system as he disrupted an execution of a woman and redeemed a life destined to be thrown away. It is amazing to me how love will lead people to speak up and speak out for human rights while disrupting life-devouring systems. Love understands that people are more than the worst things they have ever done. Love understands that people can be transformed, that people can change. Consider these three leaders from Judeo-Christian backgrounds: Moses, David, and Paul, the murderer formerly known as Saul. Each one a biblical leader with murder on his resume, in his credit file. Yet God transformed them all and blessed them to become pillars of the faith that so many people, including myself, call our own. Out of an abundance of love and a concern for justice, my organization, the Ohio Council of Churches, continues to call on Ohio lawmakers to avoid adding water to a flood, to resist matching immoral death with more immoral death. No one, regardless of what they've done, should ever be discarded, thrown away. Therefore, we applaud our lawmakers in Ohio, our bipartisan team of folks in the Senate and the House, who are the driving forces behind proposed legislation to end Ohio's death penalty. To us, they are clear and present signs of hope for our state. We thank them for calling for the end of the death penalty in Ohio. For in my view, the death penalty is a hollow instrument of death that is historically racist, economically wasteful, and structurally classist. Another false promise is here. Death penalty proponents say that death penalty implementation helps victim families. Well, not so fast. In reality, the capital punishment system, in effect, holds these co-victims in what could be 2, even 3 decades of wading through trial after trial, hearing after hearing, painfully reliving the deaths of their loved ones while waiting for executions to occur. In response to the lengthy delay in implementing death, some would say, why don't we speed up executions? Well, if we followed this path, we would run the risk of wrongful executions. While proponents say the execution system is fair, 15 Ohioans who faced death at trial have been exonerated and freed. 4 were released from life sentences and 11 after having been condemned to death, all for crimes they did not commit. For many, again, it was after decades on death row or in prison. That's another way the system pulls the rug out from under murder victim families, and that is sentencing the wrong persons to death row or prison, thus leaving the really guilty parties free to kill again. To be sure, no matter how much faith state officials have, they cannot bring wrongly executed persons back to life. Ohio's death penalty law was enacted in 1982, and our state has conducted 56 executions since 1999. I don't know how many murders have taken place since that time, but what is clear is that this rare and seemingly random practice begs the question of what government-sponsored services and supportive measures are available to the vast majority of co-victims. I can tell you that my family received nothing after Jennifer was murdered. Even so, I'm excited by programs in Ohio that are exploring the in-depth question of what resources actually exist and which ones are missing for murder victims' families in Ohio. You see, we murder victim family members deserve the truth about what happened to our loved ones. We all want dangerous offenders held accountable, and we certainly don't want the wrong persons punished. Instead of the death penalty, what I think would be bold, innovative, and helpful would be a consistent standard of service for all co-victims in Ohio. Currently, there is no statewide standard protocol of service, and services provided to co-victims vary widely depending on the budget of the county of the murder and the agencies tasked with responding to the needs of co-victims. We can do better for Ohio murder victim family members without executions, and we must. So then we call for the state to invest in true redemption through diverting funds aimed at executions. Send those funds to victim family members who need restoration, not revenge. So let the word go forth that we support legislation that has the ability to end executions in Ohio. We, as a Christian body, are emboldened by a renewable and sustainable source of power and strength, the Holy Spirit. And through that power, we are saying no to retribution, no to revenge, and no to retaliation, and yes to love, yes to redemption, and yes to restoration of victim family members, and yes to ending executions in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan. So we'll open for questions now. If anyone would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand or to send a question in the chat. Anyone have a question? Elaine, you have your hand up?
Hi. What would restitution look like? Would that be monetary, or how would that be determined?
You're muted, Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you for the question. It certainly would be monetary. I think since my sister's murder, I've estimated that Ohio spent about $16 million on the machinery and matrix of the death penalty. I think it'd be very helpful for the state to redirect funds allocated for death and send those funds to co-victims like our family, because there are ongoing needs of co-victims that could never be met by executions, like counseling, diapers. My sister had a 2-year-old daughter in the house when she was murdered. So counseling, food, tuition, mortgage payments, rent, and the list goes on and on. Burial expenses. None of those expenses could be met through executions. And certainly would not be any chance for restoration of families and closure. There's never any closure for a murder victim family. You know, the pain lasts a lifetime. But nevertheless, executions solve nothing. They don't help us at all.
There's more of a personal comment in the chat about who is rearing your niece now, and an apology for this tragic situation for you and your family.
Thank you for that question. My family took in my niece and raised her, and I call her my daughter now, and she lives in Cleveland, and she's got a family, and she's doing very well. Thanks for asking. But I'll tell you, when Jennifer was murdered, I sent a letter to the state of Ohio Victims Assistance Program explaining what happened. And I got a form letter essentially saying, we have received your letter and we'll get back with you. And here we are in 2024. I still have not heard back from that office.
Dr. Sullivan, what is the progression of getting rid of the death penalty in Ohio? Is it looking good? I know in Montana, we argued the economic cost of the death penalty rather than the moral, because it seemed to be a better argument. But what are you finding in terms of the policymakers making a change in this area?
Thank you. We do enjoy bipartisan support in both the Senate and the House in Ohio to overturn Ohio's death penalty. And there's several factors at work. And sometimes more than one factor is at work at the same time. There are those who argue against capital punishment on moral ethical grounds. And then there are those who are representing their faith, mostly Christian faith, and thou shalt not kill. Then there are those who are pro-life with respect to abortion, who have stated that they must be consistent. If they're going to be pro-life in terms of abortion, they have to be pro-life in terms of executions. Then there are those who believe that executions waste government money, and if they're ineffective, and therefore we must end the program. And then there are those who say the penalty is racist and discriminatory, and it's also classist. You never see people who are rich on death row, and so therefore we must end the practice. And so those are among the reasons that people at the State House are citing for their passion for ending capital punishment. And we take them all. You know, we have agreement on ending executions, then, you know, it doesn't matter to us the party or the faith or whatever system there is, as long as we share a common goal of defeating Ohio's death penalty.
We have some comments coming in the chat, and I see Anna, you have your hand up. Did you want to ask your question first?
Yes, thank you so much, Eva, and thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan, for first of all sharing your very personal story, but also this information and very important work you've been doing. I was wondering, generally speaking, what would you say are the biggest obstacles to abolishing death penalty?
What was the question again, please?
What would you say are the biggest obstacles to ending death penalty?
You know, the biggest obstacle that I have found is the way the power to end life seems to stick to lawmakers to the point where they cannot drop it. Nothing logical influences their decision. They are determined that they will not hear any arguments that will preserve a life. They instead believe wholeheartedly in the conviction of every person that it's accurate and no other factors matter, and they want to kill people on death row. There are those who have stated they will want to rid death row immediately by executing everybody immediately, because there's something about this power to cause death that I think is just hard to shake loose from people. It's almost like there's a thirst for ending people's lives. And the interesting thing about it is the governors that have been reached out to stop execution, they've all been Christian, sometimes devout Christians. And I just don't know what one processes in the mind as a person of faith, Christian faith particularly, that gives consent to executing another person, knowing that we all depend on God's grace and mercy on a moment-by-moment basis. And so that's the hardest thing for me to grapple with, people's insistence that they will carry out a death warrant, no matter what. And interestingly, there are people on death row whose lives have turned around completely from the time they were convicted and incarcerated and put on death row. And they have the same faith as those who are elected office. And their turnaround means nothing to the people in power. And there have been times when victim families have pleaded with the government saying, don't execute this person. We forgive them, or at the very least, we don't want to see them executed. And the state has done so anyway. I can't comprehend that.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. We
Welcome.
have several questions in the chat. The first one is, do you believe in life without parole?
Personally, I don't.
Sorry, can you hear me? Is my audio cutting out again?
Can you hear me? I don't. Now, I believe in accountability, and I believe dangerous people need to be kept away from other people. But I also believe that people can change, they can be transformed. And I would never want to give up on people experiencing transformation. And I want us to invest all that we can to help people experience transformation, whether it's religiously motivated or not. But I would like to invest in human transformation. But I also want to make sure that we stay as safe as possible in society. So people who are dangerous and continue to be so don't need to be on the streets until they have experienced some kind of transformation, if they ever will. And sadly, some they may never experience it. I believe they can, but for whatever reason, they will not. And so I don't want to throw people away for the rest of their lives when God still has the power to change lives. And there are those in our movement, though, who call for that as an alternative to executions. So the movement is not of one mind when it comes to death life without parole. You know, one of the most chilling things that happened.
Question, besides Illinois, what states? Sorry, did you hear the question?
You know, I don't keep those stats in mind, but I know that, in fact, I called it up a minute ago. There are 27 states that continue to have the death penalty on the books. 27 states still have the death penalty on the books. Of those states, though, several, like Ohio, have placed a moratorium on executions for a variety of reasons. Some can't get the drugs they want. And then some have a governor like Ohio's governor who does not want to sign off on any deaths. And so he's not warranting any executions under his watch. The next governor may not hold that same position. So we feel it's very important to abolish the death penalty in Ohio before another governor comes into office who may have an appetite for executions.
Myra, you have your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, so good to hear you again, Reverend Sullivan. It just never set well with me that the state or federal government should be in the business of executing people. And I wonder, is there a statistic on how many folks have been executed and then later were found to be innocent?
You know, there might be a stat on that. I don't have it, but I believe in my heart there have been several, including a recent execution, where people were not guilty.
Even with the modern DNA?
Well, you know, sometimes evidence is not permitted to be used, evidence that could clear somebody. And, you know, that's one of our realities. I would think that a moral society would not have restrictions on evidence that has the potential to free someone from death row and executions. But there are statutes in place, even things like the timing of it. Well, you filed your petition too late. What does that mean? You know, you filed too late. If it's valid on one day, it's valid the next day. And so, and if it can clear somebody from death row, then it should be authorized to be used to have a chance to clear that person. That's what I don't understand, how technicalities can end a person's life. A person who has innocence, or at the very least wants to demonstrate that there's another side of the story than what was shown in court. Because very often people who are being tried are not given the best counsel that they could get, whereas prosecutors seem to have unlimited resources on their side to prosecute a case. So if you're being prosecuted and you have a public defender with limited resources, then the chances are you can make the same kind of case that the prosecutor can make. And so you have a greater chance of losing in the court.
Exactly. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
There's another question in the chat. Can you hear me? Is my audio still cutting out? I'm so sorry. Could restitution be determined similarly to the way life insurance policies are?
I'm not sure what part of the life insurance policy payout to apply here. Could you say more about that?
Elaine, did you want to elaborate on the question?
Oh, I was just saying that life insurance policies usually have some kind of provision that, you know, like a person's expected lifetime earnings should be this or that. And I mean, I just think that could be a way that you could make a determination on restitution. I don't
Mhm.
know. I mean, I'm just suggesting that that would be the way that policymakers could do that. But I don't know if that's, realistic, but that was just my thought.
Yeah, thanks for putting it out there for a question. I have to think about that one. That certainly is creative. And I'd like to give more thought to that. So I probably I certainly can't give an answer to that. But I would think I would think that it could be a factor, or it should be probed at least to find out if it has any promise in determining restitution rates. Yeah. Thanks for putting it out there.
There's another question about having bipartisan support in Ohio. And there's a question if you could clarify on that a bit more, because it's difficult to imagine that it would be bipartisan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know it's hard to imagine, but it's true. Believe me, I know it's hard to imagine, but it's true. My state senator, I live in Canal, Winchester. My state senator has spoken up and out against capital punishment. She's a Republican lawmaker, and so and then there are others in Ohio who are Republican. Senator Huffman, I believe, and Representative Schmidt. They're Republicans, and then there are Democrats like Representative Miller and others. And so it truly is bipartisan. Now the question would be, would there be enough bipartisan support to cross the finish line? And
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying, because like I said in
yeah,
the chat, that bipartisan technically is one legislator from the other side. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So yeah, thank you for that's why I said in the chat, can you drill down like, exactly how many? Because one or two won't get it.
you're right. One or two won't get it. Yeah, we there are more than one or two. I don't have the exact number with me now, but I've met several, and I've stood at press conferences with a few in the past, and watched them discuss it. And so I know there's a substantial number of folks, but again, with that number and that number is also shifted. I might tell you, it is not held, but there are certainly more than a small number of folks on both sides are supporting this. And in fact, I just saw Democratic Senator Nikki Antonio last week in Cleveland, and she continues to be supportive of it and work with her folks across the aisle on the issue. But I do know that of Republicans that I've heard lately speak against it, their rationale has been the pro-life concern.
Sorry, can I just ask a follow-up? Because I live in Ohio, I guess you could probably figure it out. Is that on the House and the Senate side?
Is that what you say?
Is that on the House and the Senate side that you have
Yes.
support for Republicans?
Yeah, yes, on both.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
There was one additional question of whether your sister's perpetrator is currently on death row.
Unfortunately, that person was never found, and we don't know whatever happened, if there was more than one person involved or not. We just don't know. But there was never a trial, and I'm glad you raised that question, because there are what I call murder style points that are assigned for the more grisly acts of death, and a high number of deaths by one or two or more than one murderer. Prosecutors call those they call them they're crimes of not they're worst of the worst. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. They're called worst of the worst. And if you have only lost one person in your family to murder, that for you is the worst of the worst. And so I think that when the worst of the worst designation is given to a murder or murderers, then resources go along with that help in the investigation of the murder and bringing people to justice for the murders. Whereas if a murder is not a worst of the worst, then I don't have the data to support this, but I speculate that the monies that will go to the worst of the worst are not supplied for a case that involves only one murder or murder that's not sensational. I think sensational, flashy, if you will, murders that involve multiple people, I think those get more resources and more attention than murders that involve one person that say could just be a domestic matter or a crime of robbery or something, or So I think we've got to stop the murder style points and then the worst of the worst language, and treat with respect every family, no matter if one who was killed or one is part of several. They all matter.
What states have reversed their death penalty, and how did they do it?
The most recent one was Virginia, and they did it through lawmakers reaching agreement on both sides of the aisle. And a southern state, no less, they overturned it. So if a southern state overturned the death penalty, then I think there's hope for Ohio and other states that hold fast to it. Um, Delaware also ended its death penalty. The Supreme Court ended it there first, and then legislators took it down. So I think there's hope, but we have to make this a front burner issue in Ohio and other states, because if that doesn't happen, then the chances that more people may speak up and out against it remains lower than what it could be. According to the last stats I saw in Ohio, 59% of Ohioans preferred life without parole than they did capital punishment. So organizations like Ohioans to Stop Executions, which is a partner of ours, and other groups have been using that statistic as a call to lawmakers, saying that the death penalty needs to end because Ohio, a majority of the population is against it. So I think there's hope for it, but we have to speak up and speak out about it. And particularly to those prosecutors in Ohio who believe that the death penalty remains a deterrent to crime. There's no stat that shows that.
You mentioned that some of the pro-life movement was now coming on board with saying to be pro-life, they also have to be against the death penalty. So could you elaborate more on what the theological justification is that's still being used in support of the death penalty?
The one that people use the most is an eye for an eye. And that's the one that I hear the most. And honestly, though, I just don't hear a lot of theological language being used by supporters. What I hear is crime and punishment argument, and people being deserving of death. That's what I hear the most even from people who call themselves devout Christians. I don't hear a faith reason for the most part behind their positions, which is interesting, But there are a lot of positions that are taken by by people of faith that have no bearings in the faith, that they at least that they are willing to try to lift up.
So what would be the theological reasoning that you would use to motivate, local churches and faith communities to address this issue?
Oh, well, I mentioned one in my talk, how the time when Jesus came across a woman who was caught in the act of adultery. So she couldn't have been caught by herself, and so there had to have been somebody along with her. Where was that person? And so many people assume it was a male. Let's just say that it was. In that kind of society, then the male would not have been executed because of sexism in that society. But the woman was caught according to Scripture, and so she was the one that they brought to trial, and that punishment was death. And Jesus came along, and of course, those who had the rocks in their hands wanted him to speak about it, and he wrote in the sand. We don't know what he wrote in the sand. He probably said, "Why are you doing this?" I don't know what he wrote. But nevertheless, he ended up saying to those people, "Those of you without sin, you cast the first stone." And nobody could cast a stone because they were not without sin. And then there was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was about to be arrested, Jesus was, and Peter took out a sword, and cut the ear off of one of the military folks who were there to arrest Jesus. And Jesus healed the man's ear and told Peter to put away his sword. That's not how we conduct our lives. We don't practice violence. We don't practice retaliation. So those are just two scriptures among several that are out there that can be used from a Christian standpoint to support blocking executions. And then I mentioned earlier, we have people in the biblical text who were murderers. And what would have happened if Moses, had been executed for the murder he committed, or David, or Saul? And they all have honored places in our faith system. But what if they were been executed for their crimes? If we had the same kind of standard of justice we have now, what would happen? So, and what they did was not good. What they did was not good. So I think we have to be willing to have these kind of conversations for people who are adamant that killing people, to show that killing is wrong, is the right way to go. And say to them, not so fast. We have some alternative views about this. And we beg to differ. And no one should be ever be condemned forever for the worst thing they ever did.
About 5 minutes left. Are there any final questions that anyone has or comments that they'd like to share?
If I could offer one more comment. I did one of these talks for abolition over in a city in Western Ohio several years ago. I was standing on the stage next to a person, my friend Derek Jemison, who was on death row for 2 decades before he was exonerated. And there was a man in the audience, a Christian man, who said to me, "I believe in the death penalty, and I would pull the switch." And that just sent a shockwave through my being, because there was Derek right next to me. Derek had 6 dates for his execution posted, 6 different dates. And I'm so glad he was not executed. And then after the 6th one, he was found innocent, was nowhere near the crime scene. So I said to the gentleman, "So that means you would have killed Derek, an innocent man." think about what you just said. I hope he thought about it. So if I think someone said, and this is a rough remembrance of a statistic, that 1 out of every 10 convictions is wrong. And I've heard it said, if 1 out of every jetliners crashed, we would stop flying until we figured out the problem. So if that stat is even close to being right, 1 out of 10 persons is an innocent person, shouldn't we stop the whole death enterprise? Because innocent people are being killed by the state. So these are tough conversations, but we have to have them, I think, in our society, particularly right now.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan. I really appreciate you guiding us in this conversation. And I'm grateful to the Interfaith Center for allowing us to create this space to have these discussions. And the conversation was recorded, so I will send it out to everyone who registered as well for those who weren't able to attend. But I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone who's been here and who's engaged with the nonviolence series over the past couple of months. And I hope that you'll continue to join us for upcoming Interfaith Center programs. And I hope, Dr. Sullivan, you will come back again and participate in more talks at the Interfaith Center. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. God bless you all.
I hope you all have a great day.